the last time we talked about Bieberella, because it was like week 1 of Coachella, Bieber brought out his OG voice and everyone was pumped.
I mean, I didn't go, but I can't tell you how many times I've listened to clips that are all over Instagram. They're incredible.
And I just think it took so much for him to come back out and perform, given everything he's been through the last few years. I mean, he had that partial facial paralysis. He's been very open about his mental health.
Yeah.
And I'm just so impressed that he did it on his terms. I mean, that's bold and ballsy to tell Coachella, yeah, I'll do it, but you're not getting some grand setup.
Really quick aside, speaking of people that are outspoken about mental health that we love around here, I did get to go see Senator John Fetterman speak over the
How was
weekend.
that?
Incredible. Incredible. The man's a gem. Listening to him speak about his mental health struggles, even after the biggest win of his career, that's when he said it was the toughest.
Mm-hmm.
That was so candid, vulnerable, and truly inspirational because, in a room of strangers,
You're being super
intimate
and
setting.
vulnerable. Yeah.
Really incredible.
Good for him.
Yeah. We love him.
We do.
Plus, I wasn't sure if this event, I was really, really interested to see if he'd wear a hoodie. The man showed a hoodie and shorts. Of course he did. Yeah.
Wasn't it cold?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say, Ohio in April, it's like 40 degrees here. It's got to be cold there.
The outfit could have been, speaking to this group or Coachella.
Well, if he was in Coachella, I would have advised him to get a roommate agreement because after I got through all the TikToks and let's face it, I am a very elder millennial. But after I got through all my reels of Justin Bieber and Sabrina Carpenter bringing out Madonna, I found some very interesting ones about roommate situations at the Airbnbs. So I already knew that there were random Airbnb cancellations, which left people scrambling last minute.
Right.
But I guess I didn't think, I would imagine if you're spending thousands of dollars or hundreds of dollars on a festival ticket, you've got your staying situation pretty much straightened out.
Well,
it's going to be you and
you would think so post Firefest, but
oh my God. Insanity. But apparently that's not the case. There were a lot of reels about people having issues with getting paid back, who was paying for what, their friends bringing uninvited guests. And I'll never forget this. I got invited to a party years ago in the summer. It was a full weekend party at someone's country home. And the morning of the party, I'm getting myself together and I see this email from the host pop up. And she goes through the whole itinerary for the weekend, the trains, how everything's going to work. And she goes, and no, stop asking. You cannot bring your dusty ass friends to my house. And
listen, I learned that one the hard way after throwing a party one summer after my second year in college when I told friends that they could bring their friends that were home too. My parents were in town.
Well, that was your mistake. You never do friends and friends.
Yeah, you'd think.
To date, one of my favorite lines, it's one that I oft repeat myself. No, you may not bring your dusty ass friends to my wedding.
That did happen. That was said quite a bit. Not to me.
You said,
A, I don't have dusty ass friends. B, I knew better.
I was like, if you want to bring someone, that's fine, but run it by me. Let me know who they are. I gave in on a couple of guests and it was more of all right. But you're responsible.
Right. How do I make this go away?
That's kind of.
How do
I not have this conversation?
Yeah.
But
my guest was a friend that you, I think, would have like to invite
He was
more
lovely.
than me.
No, but lovely. And I
Like,
knew him. Like, I knew him through you. Like, I'd spoken to him on the phone. That's different. Like,
he's always
oh, I've been dating this girl for 2 weeks.
championing
Can I bring her?
what we're doing.
No.
No. No.
What?
I'm just, no, I'm not trying to share the most intimate moment of my life with a bunch of
Dusty ass
dusty
people.
ass people that are also strangers.
Like,
I'll invite the few dusty ass people that I know that I wish I didn't have to, but my hands are
well,
tied.
that's everybody. But I just found the Coachella thing so fascinating. I'm like, you spent so much money and your friend's situationship just moved into the living room.
Yeah.
So, and that
Just like
leads
your
me.
roommate's significant other.
We're going to talk more about that in a bit. But we're going to talk about the mechanics of living together. And this is what I will tell you. And Alexa, I go on and on about this, so this is not news to you. Most people spend more time picking out a couch than figuring out how they're going to live with another human being. We move in with roommates and partners and friends and sometimes people we just don't know. And we're kind of winging it and hoping it works out. There's no plan for money. There's no plan for shared space. There's no plan for what happens when that significant other just moves in or someone wants to leave early or things just stop working. And then we're all surprised when it blows up.
Are we?
Well, people act surprised. We're not. But people act surprised when it blows up. So today I wanted to talk about the mechanics of actually doing this right. Roommate agreements, cohabitation agreements, what they are, what they're not, and why a little structure up front can save you a lot of chaos later.
Yes. So these are actually legal agreements, or we're talking about like just house rules, or
so
the
my
church
opinion, roommate agreements sit somewhere in between house rules and the legal agreement. I think people really underestimate how valuable they are because no, it's not a lease, but it's absolutely enforceable as a contract if it's properly drafted. You want to think about it like the lease, that's your relationship with your landlord. The roommate agreement, that's your relationship with each other in that shared space.
The lease protects the building, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's their guarantee with you, the tenant, or tenants, if you're both on that. And the roommate agreement protects your sanity.
That's a really good way to put it. Exactly. The lease is for building landlord. You listen to me when I talk. I'm so proud of you.
Yeah. Most of the time.
The roommate agreement protects, your sanity. That was just a really good way to put it.
So we're back. This is episode 2 of Write That Down. This is the mechanics of living together and the agreements that make it work. So what are the must-haves in these agreements? Because I know also, first of all, let's start with, we talked about this last episode. It's not just for romantic partners. We know that there's also roommates that are living together, and that can be in university settings or post-grad, grad school. There's different iterations, but what are the must-haves we've kind of identified in different scenarios?
So in an off-campus situation or any situation where you're paying rent
for the roommates, right?
For the roommates, you're always going to want to start with the money because in any relationship, romantic, friends, I mean, I remember getting a Venmo request from a girl. I was not living with her, but 12 years later, I remember getting a Venmo request for something that I already paid for. And I'm still annoyed by it. So money is always going to be where friction shows up first.
Yeah.
So,
it's quantifiable. It's quantifiable.
Yeah. So you want to talk about the rent split. Is it going to be an equal split or is it going to be proportional? For roommates, what you see a lot of, especially in an off-campus college setting, is, well, my room or your room is bigger, so you should pay more of the rent, which, fair. Or I'm getting the parking space too, so I'm going to pay more of the rent because I'm getting the parking space and you're not. We touched briefly on that last episode. So you always want to talk about the rent split. And then you want to talk about the utilities, how they're divided, who pays, is it in one person's name? If it is, how does reimbursement
Or if it's
work?
included in the rent,
Well,
right?
yeah, if it's included, that would be part of your lease agreement, and that would be proportionately split in the rent. So money-wise, you always want to start with the money. And then you want to talk about the lifestyle, and I think this is where most people have no problem discussing the rent split. That's actually pretty easy. That's money. And it's very easy to say, well,
The quantifiables are easy.
right, it's the rent's $2,500 a month. We're each paying this much, 13 or $1,250. We're each going to pay $1,250 a month. When it comes to the actual lifestyle, this is where people avoid the conversations and then they deeply regret it a couple of months in. You want to talk about in your roommate agreement, the common spaces. What are sort of the rules of use? And I'm not saying like you can only be in here from 4 to 6 p.m. What I'm saying is if your roommate is a fitness fanatic, maybe you have a discussion about, hey, don't work out in the common room at 5 a.m. while I'm sleeping.
Or maybe go to the gym or
but
your
that's not always an
building.
option. So,
But it is good to be mindful of because you could be like neighbors I've had where the building has a lovely gym and they like to drop free weights on their floor, which is my ceiling. And that's a really good way to breach your lease.
it is a good way to breach your lease.
I'd be mad at my roommate if that were happening on our behalf because of them.
You want to talk about your common spaces. You want to talk about guest policies. I've seen a lot of situations where one roommate's romantic partner is staying over 4, 5, 6 nights a week. They're basically living there, but they're not contributing to rent or utilities. And the other is now stuck subsidizing someone they never agreed to live with. It's kind of like you're sitting there saying, why am I paying for their showers? Like, we pay for water. This person doesn't contribute to anything. So you definitely want to have a guest policy in there. Usually in dormitories, they do have guest policies, and a lot of buildings also have guest policies. But if yours doesn't, or you want to refine that more, because a lot of them can be very vague,
Right.
you want to have a say in who's in your apartment or in your home. Quiet hours, very big for college students or anyone in school still.
Or that works from home.
I was going to say, someone who's working from home, that's going to be a big deal. I get that, like, you may have a day off that I don't have, but that doesn't mean you can have a Cinco de Mayo rager while I'm in the middle of a meeting. Like, that's not going to work.
No.
Pets, we touched briefly on this in our first episode, but pets is a big deal because if one roommate has a pet, they're responsible for that pet, but the other roommate's agreeing to live with that pet. And there are certain responsibilities that come with that, not having poisonous plants in common areas, not leaving your Manolos out on the floor in the living room, and then you get upset when your roommate's dog chews it to pieces. Well, it was in the common area. It never should have been there. It's figuring out who's responsible for what. And then, of course, and this is a sticking point for so many people, especially in like a college setting, cleaning responsibilities. Are you guys going to have a division of labor? Are you just both going to contribute to a weekly or bi-weekly housekeeper? What works best for you guys? And maybe at the beginning you're like, chore charts are fine. But by like month 3, the sink is full of dishes and no one's cleaned the bathroom in 2 months.
Right. I mean,
and
if
maybe
you're not
it's time to reevaluate.
Right. If you're not the same level of dirtball or neat freak or somewhere in between, it can get sticky. And I mean that literally and figuratively. And I think that is not something that you want to let fester because
that's going to be one of the biggest things that's going to cause a fight.
What are some of the awkward things that people also skip?
I would say the 2 big ones are definitely going to be moving out early and subletting. You definitely need to clarify who's on the lease. Sometimes there's like what we call a master tenant, where it's one person's on the lease and they're subletting that second room or subletting other rooms. So you want to determine who's on the lease, because ultimately if you're the master tenant and you're subletting, you're on the hook for everything. And then you want to make sure that there's something in your roommate agreement that if one person wants out early, they're still responsible. So can they replace themselves? Does the other roommate have to approve? What is that process? Like, the way I would write it and the way I've written it for Closet is you are responsible for finding a replacement. the roommate does have to approve, but they cannot make it difficult.
Right.
Like, they can't just be saying no
down
to say no. You and I have both seen this where you sign a lease, or two people sign a lease, and in 6 months in, someone's moving in with a boyfriend or a girlfriend or getting a new job or just wants to leave. And without an agreement, the other person is stuck covering the full rent or scrambling on Craigslist to find someone new.
or reaching out to everyone in their network. And we do know that just because someone knows someone does not always mean that they pass
The
the
litmus
litmus
test.
test.
A lot of times you look
Like
at your
the-
friends. Like, I've been set up on blind dates where I've looked at my friends and just gone, wow.
That's what you think of me?
Wow.
Okay.
Wow. Like, it's not that the person that they know is a bad person. It's just like, you know me. Why would you
I
think?
thought you knew me.
Now
I
I'm
thought you
questioning
knew me.
everything.
Everything.
So
An
when it comes,
existential crisis in plain out.
so when it comes to leaving early, subletting, the absolute worst time to find out what those rules are when someone's already got a foot out the door. When they've already got like their Amazon packing bags ready to go, it's a little late.
Movers booked. The little stick over their shoulder with the little
Just ready to go.
on the end.
Real quick, who's taking your place? Nobody. See you later.
Hadn't really thought about that. Don't worry. All right.
That sounds like a you problem. You don't let on that one. You don't want it to be a you problem. You want it to be a them problem that you can help with.
It's an us problem until you've given mutually agreed upon solutions that are also within the confines of your lease.
Exactly. And that can be another thing. Leases can be pretty strict on subletting. So you always want to know if that's in your lease. Like, can you sublet or is it not allowed? Because then you have to work with your landlord.
I think these are all the awkward things that
no one wants to talk about.
Right. Like, so excited to move in with you. This is going to be so fun. Or love the new city we're going to be in. By the way, summer's coming up. Should you get an itch or a really great opportunity, what's it look like when you're going to
leave?
Yeah. When you,
especially because in a lot of cities now is like the time that people are renewing their leases or panic renewing or finding roommates or trying to get out of a situation. So you always want to be prepared for it.
So talk to me about the deposit. That feels like it can get really messy.
The security deposit. So security deposit is usually going to be 1 month's rent. It can get really messy unless you document it. So you want to make sure that you are paying attention to who contributed and what they contributed and how it's going to be returned. So generally you would split that evenly amongst all the roommates. Keep track of all the contributions. Let's say it's 3 roommates, the rent's $3,000. Each roommate contributes $1,000. If someone leaves early, contribute $1,000.
If someone does leave early,
are they being bought out of their security deposit or are they waiting until the lease ends? Now, it really depends on your subletting situation. If you can have a sublet, what you can do is you can have the sublessor contribute $1,000 to the security deposit, at which point the $1,000 that the roommate who's leaving contributed would return back to them. Or they can wait until the lease ends. Now, you always have to remember the security deposit, it remains with the landlord or the building until they do their final walkthrough. And any damages beyond normal wear and tear, which is going to be like scuff marks.
Even if they have like carpet repair or things like
carpet repair, like little things like that are normal wear and tear. Gouges in the wall, not normal wear and tear. Holes in the wall, not normal wear and tear.
Will that come home?
Punching through the wall, not normal wear and tear.
Yeah.
So that's where you kind of have to make sure it's in your agreement that if the damage was done by a certain person, you have to document the damage all along. Like, let's say you and I and how's Beck gonna feel about me using her in an example?
User.
All right, you, me and Beck, we live in an apartment together, and you and I are using command hooks to hang our pictures. And Beck's like, a command hook is useless.
Never
I'm
matter.
nailing this in. And we say, well, you can nail it in, but we're documenting this. And unless you spackle and paint it, this comes out of your portion of the security deposit.
I would pay to see that. I would.
So then when we're getting our $1,000 back, the landlord's going to take $200 off because there's a bunch of holes in her wall. Well, she's not getting $1,000. She's getting $800.
Best case.
Like, I'm not paying for that.
Best case.
But you want to make sure that any damage is documented throughout the stay so that if your roommate's boyfriend or girlfriend comes over and has a fit of rage and punches the wall, which you should also be looking to get your friend some help. There might be an intervention needed.
I think there might be a little bit of like a DV.
That's also known as DV, and you should probably call the police. That's a dangerous situation. Get help.
I don't think they'd be invited back.
That roommate who brought that guest in is responsible for that damage. You are always responsible for your guest's damage.
Right. In your unit or otherwise.
Elsewhere in the building. Always. That is pretty universal.
Pool, gym, anything.
You're responsible for their behavior. With the security deposit, you just want to keep track of who contributed what, how it's going to get returned, and who's... It's damage, but it's not necessarily like, oh, you ruined our apartment. It can literally just be hanging a picture.
Right. It doesn't have to
document
full on so-and-so punched a hole in the wall, which is beyond bananas.
But it's known to happen. When it comes to money, have long memories. They can remember short when they owe. When they're owed, like people will remember like who they sent a Venmo request to in 2019 and didn't get paid back by. So you don't want your security deposit to be part of that.
Okay, so let's talk about what happens maybe when things go sideways a little bit to the left.
So you're talking about like when they're not agreeing and things are starting to escalate.
Yeah.
So in a roommate agreement, you can have a step that's built in. It can be very simple, agreeing to sit down and have a conversation. Or for our agreements, the first step is always going to be sit down, have a conversation, see if you can sort it out. If you can't, then you go to mediation. And mediation is just meeting with a third party, unbiased, and they help you sort it out. And they go to the agreement and they're like, well, this is what you agreed to. How can we come back to this? Because you both agreed to all of this. So where did we come apart? And it sounds really formal and legal, which can be a little scary. It's really not. Mediation is always done by an attorney, but it's really before you both go get a lawyer, which in a roommate situation is sort of drastic and you want to avoid at all costs. So mediator, it keeps things from getting nuclear.
Yeah.
It just keeps it easy.
Sure. I think it sounds formal, but
so those are going to be like the biggest things you want to hit in a roommate agreement.
I think that sounds fair. So let's talk about how these things change when it comes to couples. And I think let's preface this. This is, if you remember on our episode last week, we talked about the catalyst for closet, right? Which was a romantic relationship that I was in. I think that a lot of the elusiveness that surrounds cohabitation agreements is that they're not necessarily as widely known by people that do seek to get married. So I think the idea is that they can be a great placeholder until you're ready to move on. You get engaged and then you're talking about a prenup, right? So they're not in place of necessarily the other things that can come down the pipe for people that do want to eventually merge legally and, finances, things like that. But for people that do want protection as a cohabitating couple, they're really great, whether they want that future of marriage or not. Let's talk about maybe how those are different for couples.
I think the biggest misconception is that when you live together, you have some sort of protection because you're a couple. Let me be very clear to everyone. Just because you live with your romantic partner, it creates no legal protection. Cohabitation is not marriage. There are very limited default rights. You could share a bed, a lease, a dog, and you can have zero legal protection. So people always talk about, oh, I got engaged, we're getting a prenup. That's great. What are you doing right now when you're living together? I don't think people that are friends with me know how vulnerable they are because I don't shut up about it. I'm pretty vocal about it.
I don't either.
But it took going through it for you to realize just how little protection there was. And I think when people first find out how vulnerable they are without one, they get really defensive sort of immediately. So then even getting them to talk about a cohabitation agreement is really hard because they're trying to protect themselves. A cohabitation agreement, you don't want it because you want to protect yourself from the other person.
No, not at all.
You want it so that you're prepared for certain... Sorry?
Not at all. That's a huge misconception and something
misconception.
Along with the fact that you're doing something like this instead of the eventual prenup and marriage, right?
Right. But this can be your first step towards that. And it starts the conversations that you will, if you're going to get a prenup, you will eventually have to have those conversations.
Really, really good practice for that.
And I think you should. Having gone through one, these are not light conversations that you're having. For me, it's not about protecting yourself from the other person. It's about laying out the playbook so that you can protect your relationship as a whole.
Let's get into what are couples actually protecting in a cohabitation agreement?
So there's a lot of things that you are protecting. I think on our cohabitation agreements, if you select each and everything, meaning you are talking about biological children, adopted children, children from previous relationships, family financial contributions, there's a lot of things that could go into a cohabitation agreement. The biggest thing and the first thing you're going to talk about is you want to distinguish between what you brought into the relationship versus what you build together. Because very much like in a marriage, in most states, I think in all states, well, maybe not. I'm not going to speak to all states. I will speak to New York, which is where I am barred. In New York, whatever you have before you get married, that's yours. And that will stay yours.
Personal property versus...
Personal property. So if anything were to ever happen between Scott and I, prenup or not, whatever I brought into the marriage would remain mine, and what he brought in would remain his.
Big distinction, right? So for people that don't have a prenup, the government literally kind of creates one for you.
But in New York State, it would stay pretty much the same lineup.
Right.
Whatever you have, that's separate. It's considered separate property. And whatever you create or build during the relationship or during the marriage, that's yours. And that has to get split. Is what we call it marital property.
Right.
But in the case of a cohabitation, because you're not married, you want to distinguish between what you brought into the relationship versus what you create while you're living together. So once you've sort of sorted that out, and that's very couple dependent. That could be something where I've seen people that have no interest in getting married, but they're in this very long-term committed relationship where there may or may not be children, but one partner is essentially stay-at-home. Well, that stay-at-home partner is helping the partner that's going to work build their empire because they're taking care of all the day-to-day things that this person no longer has to think about. They just have to think about going out and making money. Well, if you're not married and you break up, legally, you have no rights to any of that.
Right.
So in your cohabitation agreement, you want to make sure that whatever you create during the relationship together, you agree on how that's split.
Sure.
And then you want to talk about the financial contributions. Is it equal versus unequal contributions? Are you paying the same amount for everything? Or is one person paying significantly more? What are your shared expenses? Are you doing a shared savings or asset building sort of setup? Like, what does that look like? And I think you and I have seen this where one partner earns significantly more than the other and is covering more, but they've never defined what that means. And one person sees it as generosity and the other sees it as a shared lifestyle. Those aren't the same thing.
No.
Those are not even remotely the same thing. A shared lifestyle, you see that as when this ends, my lifestyle should continue. When it's generosity, it's when I'm done being generous, I'm done being generous.
Yes, I would say so. I think something else that is interesting too is when people buy property together or adopt animals. Pets, they become part of the family, right?
Pets, that's a big one that you see. I see more people fighting over the dog than I see people fighting over money.
And a lot's changed there.
I will say, like, in New York, pets are now legally recognized as family members as of last year. Pets in general, they're family. When you have a pet, and I'm going to use the example of a dog, but that can count towards a cat, there's a really hilarious legal joke about someone saying, I went to law school so that I could go to court and make sure that my divorcing clients can't teach their cockatoo to say bad things about the others. They're like, I went to law school for this. And so it's really any pet you have. And you want to make sure that if it's going to be a shared custody arrangement, those are really popular right now. Who's paying for the veterinary care? Who makes those decisions? Where's the dog getting kenneled when someone's away? So you kind of want to line all of that up before you're already in the fight, because people, when they are emotional and they're angry, they can get vindictive, and it could be a situation, and I've seen this happen. Well, I don't like the dog that much, but he really wants the dog, and now I don't want him to have the dog.
But is that
like
the best thing for...
It's not necessarily the best thing for the dog. So you want to have that all sort of set up beforehand. But there's a lot of things that go into a cohabitation agreement. It's essentially a prenup without marriage, is what if you want to look at it in terms of what can go into it. With cohabitation agreements, there's something that not many people talk about because a lot of jurisdictions don't recognize it or recognize the claims for it. It's called palimony. It's kind of like alimony.
It's between pals, right?
Obviously. Some courts may recognize support claims after long-term cohabitation. So what that means is if you've been living together for a very long time, you may be able to have a claim for financial support with your partner. It really depends on the jurisdiction you're in. There are a lot that don't recognize it. There are some that do, and there are some that are sort of on it. You want to have something in your agreement that lets you define the expectations instead of leaving it to a court if it even got to there. It's sort of the difference between, and you mentioned this earlier, between deciding your terms now or having them decided for you later.
Absolutely. If you don't define these things, right? Just like in a prenup, these things are decided more or less for you.
The cohabitation situation, it's not, you're so vulnerable. When you're married, if you don't have a prenup, the state essentially, wherever you live, creates one for you.
Right.
So you have some legal protection there.
That's why I think it's so interesting to me when people are so turned off by one, because there is a default one, more or less. And I have a feeling you're going to like it a lot less.
Most people like things more when they have a say in them.
Right.
Unless you're like one of those fly by the seat of your pants people who just likes to show up places and like ready to go with the flow. Sometimes you want to say in what your future looks like.
I mean, this sounds bad, but I mean, I barely order straight off the menu without making changes. So, I mean, I'm always kind of trying to understand my options in different
One size is not always fits all. And I think that some states do a really good job of trying to at least make it fair, or as fair as it can be without the parties having their own say. I think where people get lost is, especially in cohabitation, well, my partner will be fair to me. Let's be very clear. Most people, when they're done with something, unless they have to do something after that, they're done.
Well, and it does tell you a lot about someone, but you don't want to get to that point to
you
see
don't
that
want to
they're
get to that point.
something.
You don't want to get to the point where all of a sudden you hate someone you love. Like you lived together, you were in a long-term partnership, you loved each other enough at the beginning,
right,
to lay out the playbook.
I think that was one of the biggest takeaways for me when you were going through the prenup. And it's like, if someone does not want to put pen to paper and write that down, the things that would make you feel comfortable and safe and valued moving forward with this really big step of your life that is ultimately incredibly exciting, but life altering, it kind of should make you pause and say, wait a minute, there might be something bigger here that, I should be taking a beat for a second and say, why not? What is it there that there might be something deeper that,
there might be. It might also be.
Remember?
I do remember. I will say this personally. I felt, and I always felt very comfortable and safe with my husband. Like before we got married, while we were dating, this. What is the biggest thing I always said about him? I never wondered
No.
I always knew.
We love Scott.
But once we sort of got through negotiating our prenup, I can honestly say, short of the relationship I have with my parents, which I'm an only child, they love me. I gotta be honest, they're sort of obsessed with me. My mom calls me her Stradivarius. It's pretty great.
I didn't know about that one. That's a new one.
But
I like that.
short of that, the relationship I have with my parents, who love me my whole life, I've never felt safer or more secure in a relationship post negotiating my prenup.
Right. I think it can really facilitate.
I feel loved. I feel safe, secure. And I also feel like now, like, we can literally talk about anything. Like, anything.
You know that Scott always has your best interest in mind. I mean, sometimes he needs a little reminder and a little, but
sometimes he needs a little nudge, like, excuse me, the gremlin has something to say.
Sir, is this thing on?
So outside of marriage, and the reason that I talk mostly about my prenup is because Scott and I didn't live together before we got married. Not for a moral reason or a religious reason. It was just, like I said in our last episode, we both owned our own places.
In very different parts of town, too.
In different boroughs, which in New York is essentially a long-distance relationship.
Might as well have been like one of you living in Jersey and one of you in New York.
Pretty much.
Yeah. Your relationship
we probably would have seen
distance.
each other more because those trains are easier.
Yeah, but like your relationship went the distance despite all odds.
Well, we put that work in, and early on we established that things would be in writing. We were both pretty adamant about that. It came up on our first date. But that's why I talk more about my prenup than a cohabitation agreement. But I look at a cohabitation agreement as what gives you that same sense of security and safety as the prenup gave me.
So talk to me about what happens if it ends.
So it sounds a little defeatist, and I think that this is most people's gripes with these kinds of agreements, like, oh, you're preparing for it to end. No, we're not. But if and when it does end, we want to have a process. So you're going to need a termination clause, which will include who keeps what, assets, furniture, pets. If it's a lease, what happens to the lease? Are you both leaving? Is one person staying?
Or in a property that
one person owns.
Sure.
How long do you have to leave? I can tell you I've seen situations where someone moves into a family home where it's owned by a family trust. And you can't just ask that person, well, we know your situation. But in a cohabitation agreement, basically what you can put in is a clause that states that the person who, let's say the person who's the beneficiary of the trust, who essentially for the purposes of this conversation is the owner of the house or the apartment, they initiate the breakup. You have to give the other person 60 to 90 days.
Whatever the agreement might say.
Whatever the agreement states.
Sure.
And it can change based on who's initiating. That's pretty normal. And we talked about this earlier, but you know, the relationships that I've seen end, the biggest fight wasn't about the money or the apartment. It's about the dog.
Do you blame them?
No, or who gets to stay on the lease. And that's premium because it's hard to get housing here. And without an agreement, there's really no clear answer. It's just two people arguing at a very emotional time. I will say this. If you can't talk about a potential breakup, you are in no way, shape, or form prepared for it.
Okay, fair. The same way if you're not prepared to talk about your needs, you're probably not prepared to live with someone or be in that type of relationship, right? Okay, so to be clear, does this replace things like wills?
No, absolutely not. A cohabitation agreement does not replace... Seriously, write this down. This does not replace things like wills. A cohabitation agreement does not replace a will, a power of attorney, or beneficiary designations. If you want your partner to be protected, you need both the cohabitation agreement and the will.
No, and that's critical.
Because you see that a lot with people that are older that never got married, that have lived together forever, and one partner dies because they're older. And their partner thinks that they can stay in the apartment and that they're entitled to assets. You're not entitled to anything if it's not in a will.
Right. I think if you want your partner protected, you need both.
You do. Absolutely. You need a cohabitation agreement and you need a will.
Right. And if you're really smart, you put things in trusts.
Trust. But that's a whole different conversation. And we're going to let other people handle the trust and will conversation.
Yeah.
Most people are like, I have no real assets. I don't need a trust. You need a trust.
So why don't more people do this?
Honestly, I think it's because They think it has to be complicated, expensive, or overly formal. And it doesn't. It just has to be clear, intentional, and reflect how people actually live. And I think that's the gap that we kept seeing. People needed something practical and accessible that helped them have these conversations before things went awry.
Yeah.
Because people don't need legal theory. They need something that's structured for real life.
Right. And
Out
maybe,
there is not structured for real life.
well, and maybe they didn't know that these were options. That's what you and I kind of kept hearing a lot.
Yeah, because, and it's funny, like, I don't know how much you watch The Big Bang Theory.
I love it. That's how I
But that's kind of like the show I'll have on in the background pretty much at all times. And Sheldon is really big on contracts.
Yes,
he loves a roommate agreement. And when he found
And
Amy, it was
he
the
have a best
relationship
friend
agreement.
and a relationship agreement.
So they're out there. I think that people just don't look at it as something feasible for them because they look at it as I have to hire a lawyer, that's a retainer, that's like an hourly, it's all of these things. And I think that was the gap that we kept seeing.
Yeah.
That like if you told people about it, oh my God, I would love to have one. Where do I get it? And it's kind of like, well, there's no place to send you where it's structured for actual living.
And it doesn't take weeks of back and forth with an attorney and
Back and forth and thousands of dollars. Yeah. Like if you're moving into a new place,
not hold up in court the way you'd like later. And
so
right.
I think that for me, what I see the biggest sort of barrier to entry on it is the cost. When you're getting a new apartment, that's going to be first and last month's rent up front, and then you pay your rent on top of it. And you're going to book movers, or maybe you need to buy all new furniture. You don't have $6,000 or $7,000 to go spend on an attorney, depending on where you are.
Yeah.
Or you're going to get something that's a template that is essentially your lease.
Well, which also
just like re-signed with your roommate.
And may not follow the law of the land
of where you are.
So will not hold up in court.
It may not include the things that are right, or it may not include the things that are important to you.
Right, and is not collaborative and therefore could also not hold up in court.
Mm-hmm.
Not that you want to take this to court, but especially a cohabitation agreement, God forbid something happens to your partner, right? Like we said, you want cohab agreement and a will. But, if it's not collaboratively created, I learned this from my friend Hillary, the attorney.
Yes, if it's not done collaboratively, it's very difficult to hold up in court. And then, of course, you can draft your own using AI. But the whole thing that makes these things enforceable is that they're drafted correctly.
And the layperson does not understand if that's truly the case or not. Or we're hearing a lot of cases in court right now.
You hear a lot of cases in court where courts are just like, we're not enforcing this, or AI can hallucinate things that are not accurate. And if you don't have what we call a severability clause, it can render your entire agreement. You can have one clause in there that's just not a thing. And if you don't have a severability clause, and I've never seen one in an AI generated agreement where like people have sent me like, oh, I did this on chat, is this okay? And I look at it and I'm like, I mean, parts of it are, but this whole section isn't. And because there's no severability clause, like you just rendered your entire agreement null and void.
So what you're telling me is the AI agent that wrote that contract would not make it as employee of the month at the firm.
Probably not.
Got it. Okay. So, just back to basics. Remind me who actually needs these, whether it's roommate,
anyone share. I don't care if you're a roommate, a cohabitator. I don't care what you are. Anyone sharing space, money, or expectations. with another adult. An adult, in my world, adulthood starts at 18. That is when you can legally bind yourself to a contract. I don't look at these agreements as pessimistic. I look at them as preventative. You do preventative care for your body all the time.
Your
It's why
car.
we go to doctors. It's why you bring your car in for service.
You
It's why
want
you
it to
get
last,
physical.
not because you're saying something's wrong with it.
Right. You want to make sure everything's running smoothly. So it's the same thing. These agreements let you be generous and clear at the same time. It's never about planning for things to go wrong. It's about making sure that they don't.
As we always remind you, it's not about who you live with, it's about how you live together. This is Write That Down. Next episode, we're getting into the roommates from hell. Everyone has a story, and if you're lucky enough not to, let's keep it that way.